Step into the 20th century like you've never seen it before. This video takes you on a visual journey through 25 rare, strange, and powerful photographs, one for each major event, from 1900 to 1999. Each decade brings 5 key moments that shaped our world. C. The dawn of cars and silent protests. The horror of war and genocide. The moon landing and the fall of walls. The birth of the internet. The collapse of empires. Every photo tells a story. Every frame is history. In 1900, Germany witnessed the first successful flight of the controllable airship LZ-1, built by Ferdinand von Zeppelin. It marked the beginning of a new era in aviation and opened the path to passenger air travel. In 1903, Marie Curie became the first woman to win a Nobel Prize for her discoveries in radioactivity. Her breakthrough laid the foundation for future research in physics and medicine. In 1904, New York City opened its first subway. It was a revolution in urban transportation and quickly transformed the rhythm of daily life in the city. In 1906, construction of the Panama Canal entered its active phase, one of the greatest engineering feats of its time, connecting 2 oceans and transforming global trade routes. In 1908, thousands of women marched through the streets of London demanding the right to vote. It was a turning point in the global history of the women's rights movement. In 1911, American aviator Calbraith Perry Rogers became the first person to fly across the United States from coast to coast in a Wright EX airplane. It proved that aviation was more than a stunt. It was the future of travel. On the night of April 14-15, 1912, the Titanic, the most luxurious passenger ship of its time, sank in the North Atlantic. The deaths of over 1,500 people shocked the world and changed maritime safety forever. In 1914, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand triggered World War I, a global conflict that claimed millions of lives and redrew the map of Europe forever. In 1917, the Bolsheviks overthrew the provisional government in Russia, beginning the era of the Soviet Union. It marked one of the most radical societal transformations of the 20th century. In 1918, the world was struck by the Spanish flu pandemic, which killed an estimated 20 to 50 million people. It became one of the deadliest outbreaks in human history. In 1920, the United States ratified the 19th Amendment, granting women the right to vote. It was the result of decades of suffragette activism and marked a milestone in the fight for equality. In 1923, Germany faced hyperinflation. The mark lost all value. People carried cash in wheelbarrows to buy bread. Savings evaporated, the economy collapsed, and protests spread across cities. In January 1924, Vladimir Lenin died. His death triggered nationwide mourning and a power struggle within the Soviet Union, ultimately leading to Joseph Stalin's rise. In 1927, Charles Lindbergh became the first person to fly solo, non-stop, across the Atlantic. His flight made him an international hero and marked a major aviation milestone. In October 1929, the U.S. stock market crashed, triggering the Great Depression, the worst economic crisis of the 20th century. Unemployment, poverty, and despair swept across the globe. In 1930, Mahatma Gandhi led the Salt March, a peaceful protest against British control over salt. Thousands followed him across hundreds of kilometers. It became a powerful symbol of nonviolent resistance. In 1933, Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany. This marked the beginning of the Third Reich's dictatorship, repression, militarization, and the path toward World War II. In 1936, the Spanish Civil War broke out between Republicans and nationalists. A brutal conflict followed, involving international volunteers and foreshadowing broader European wars. In 1937, the German airship Hindenburg caught fire while landing in the U.S. 36 people died. The disaster ended the era of passenger airships. The world was stunned by a live radio report. In September 1939, Germany invaded Poland, triggering World War II. Britain and France declared war on the Third Reich. The world was plunged once again into global conflict. In 1940, Britain withstood a massive air assault by Nazi Germany. The Battle of Britain was the first major campaign fought entirely by air forces and marked a turning point in World War II. On December 7, 1941, Japan attacked the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor. The assault drew the United States into World War II, a date which will live in infamy, said President Roosevelt. In January 1945, Soviet troops liberated Auschwitz concentration camp. The world was confronted with the horrors of the Holocaust: emaciated survivors, mass graves, gas chambers. On August 6, 1945, the U.S. dropped the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima. Tens of thousands died. The event hastened the end of World War II, but ushered in the nuclear age. In 1949, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, was formed, a military alliance of Western nations to counter the Soviet threat. It marked the beginning of the Cold War. In June 1950, North Korea, backed by the USSR, invaded South Korea. A brutal war followed between the North and UN forces led by the US. The war ended in a truce, not peace. On March 5, 1953, Joseph Stalin died. His death ended an era of brutal dictatorship and opened the door to political thaw and partial de-Stalinization. In 1954, RCA released the first mass-market color television. It launched a new era of visual media. Television became the center of family entertainment. On October 4, 1957, the USSR launched Sputnik 1, the first artificial satellite in history. This event sparked the space race between the USSR and the USA. In 1959, Fidel Castro and his guerrillas overthrew the Batista regime in Cuba. A socialist revolution began, and Cuba moved closer to the Soviet Union. In 1961, East German authorities began building the Berlin Wall, a symbol of the Cold War and a divided Europe. It separated East and West Berlin for 28 years. On November 22, 1963, U.S. President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas. His death shocked the world and marked a turning point in American history. In 1964, the U.S. passed the Civil Rights Act, ending racial segregation in public spaces and schools. It marked a major victory for the civil rights movement. In the summer of 1967, thousands of young people gathered in San Francisco to protest war and promote peace, love, and freedom. The hippie movement reached its peak. On July 20, 1969, Apollo 11 astronauts became the first humans to walk on the moon. Neil Armstrong said, "That's one small step for man." In 1972, a break-in at the Democratic headquarters in the Watergate complex triggered the biggest political scandal in U.S. history, leading to President Nixon's resignation in 1974. In 1973, after the Yom Kippur War began, OPEC imposed an oil embargo on the West, triggering an energy crisis, long gas lines, and soaring fuel prices. On April 30, 1975, North Vietnamese forces captured Saigon, ending the Vietnam War. U.S. personnel and civilians were evacuated from rooftops by helicopters. In 1976, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak founded Apple and launched the Apple I, the first personal computer for the masses. It marked the start of the digital revolution. In 1979, Islamic fundamentalists led by Ayatollah Khomeini overthrew the Shah. Iran became an Islamic republic. The U.S. embassy hostage crisis soon followed. On March 30, 1981, U.S. President Ronald Reagan survived an assassination attempt. His recovery and resilience boosted his popularity. On January 1, 1983, ARPANET switched to the TCP/IP protocol, marking the official birth of the modern Internet. On April 26, 1986, reactor number 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant exploded, the worst nuclear disaster in human history. In 1987, U.S. President Ronald Reagan stood at the Berlin Wall and famously declared, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." On November 9, 1989, the Berlin Wall fell. Germans from both sides embraced and celebrated, marking the symbolic end of the Cold War. In January 1991, the U.S. and coalition forces launched Operation Desert Storm after Iraq invaded Kuwait. It was the first war broadcast live on television. On December 25, 1991, the Soviet Union officially dissolved. Mikhail Gorbachev resigned, and the Soviet flag was lowered over the Kremlin. In the spring of 1994, around 800,000 people, mostly Tutsi, were killed during a brutal ethnic genocide in Rwanda over the span of 100 days. On August 31, 1997, Princess Diana died in a car crash in Paris. She was mourned globally as the people's princess. In late 1999, global panic surrounded the Y2K bug, a fear that computers would malfunction at the turn of the millennium.